So I'd like to change gears here and kind of show some of the first, at least in this case, the first four processors and how they work with a demo. So this demo is going to showcase a scenario kind of involving the real-time tracking and recovery of an asset, or in this case, I believe it's a large mammal of some sort by a team of three trackers in the field. So we'll have data coming in from two different sources. One feed's going to provide the location and attribute information of our three trackers, and at a different rate, we're going to have the asset or the mammal in this case coming through. So as our GeoEvent service receives the data regarding the location of these different groups or assets, the event joiner processor is going to be the first processor that takes effect, and it's going to perform a near real-time join on these records to bring the locations of each within the same event record. Once we have that new joined definition that contains the location of each of the trackers as well as the asset or the mammal, we're going to then be able to use the bearing calculator to establish the bearing between the trackers as the origin and the mammal or asset as the destination. The resulting bearing value simultaneously gets used to calculate a range fan, because if we recall from earlier, the range fan needs a bearing, a range, and an arc angle value. So once we calculate the range fan with the bearing value, we'll then see some range fans show up on the map. And the last component of this is whenever the tracker's range fan intersects the asset or the mammal in this case, we're going to see an alert show up and some sort of messaging happen. Now, the actual email itself isn't going to be taking place within the demo in front of us. However, I just want to take the time to say that this is where the event volume controller would come into play to kind of throttle the rate of emails sent as data comes through. So let's go ahead and take a look at this demo. Represented as blue points, we have our three trackers moving along the road. They're seeking out a large tagged mammal that was reported in the area. And in red, our GeoEvent services just received the last known location of this tagged mammal. Now, because the GeoEvent service has obtained the location of each feature, and each feature shares a common join field value, GeoEvent is immediately able to join these records in order to then establish a dynamic bearing and range fan in real time. This range fan gives us tremendous operational insight into what the trackers may be seeing on the ground, especially as they approach and traverse the heavily forested areas. As GeoEvent continues to receive the last known location of the tagged mammal, we can see our trackers adjust course using the dynamic bearing provided to them. Additionally, each range fan gets updated. Now, as the tracker's range fan crosses paths with the mammal, as seen here, our GeoEvent service displays a visual notification of the encounter. We can assume that the tagged mammal has been recovered as shown in the pop-up. Now, I should say that while this isn't currently shown in the demo, we can also use the messaging capabilities of GeoEvent Server to notify appropriate operations staff of the encounter. Operations can then confirm details on the ground based on the encounter notification. Lastly, using the event volume controller, we can configure GeoEvent Server to send only one notification of the incident as it is happening in real time. We can avoid sending a continuous stream of messages based on the continuous spatial intersection of the tracker's range fan and mammal location. Let's go ahead and take a look under the hood at the GeoEvent service that made this demo possible. Specifically, we'll be talking about the new processors and how it enabled this particular workflow. So the process for each message within this service begins when the tracker's device sends an automated location update. This message is simply forwarded onto an output stream service that maintains only the most recent location of each tracker in the web map. And you may note that the same sort of process is happening for the mammal's feed as well. As its data is coming in and as its location is getting updated, we see this reflected via its own stream service in the web map too. But kind of looking at the core of the service here, where we see some of the new processors in use, we first have the event joiner to consider. So once the data comes in about where all our trackers are, as well as once the data comes in about where our mammals are, that's when we can begin to create a real-time join using the event joiner. So let's talk a little bit about the schema of the data that makes this join possible. So in the tracker group, among all the fields associated with the tracker data is a task field with a value for each tracker called mammal. Now, in the mammal data or schema is a naming field called name that also has a value of mammal. So by specifying from the tracker group this task field is our join field, and by specifying from the mammal data the name field is the join field, and both of those fields containing a value of mammal, we're able to bring these records together using the joiner. And the reason we want to bring these records in together with the joiner is so we have one event record, kind of a master definition, so to speak, that contains both geometries, both of all the trackers as well as the mammal. And with these geometries, these dual geometries, we're able to then use those as inputs for the bearing calculator. So if we recall from before, the bearing calculator requires an origin and a destination within the same event record in order to calculate that bearing. And so in this case, our trackers and their location is the origin, and the bearing is then generated using the mammal's location within the same record as the destination. So once we get that bearing value in degrees, we can then pass on this data to the range fan calculator, where we then calculate a range fan using the bearing value as well as an existing range and arc angle. And we can see at the very end here that with the range fan being generated on the fly or in real time, that's also getting displayed on the web map via its own stream service. The last kind of component, or second to last, I should say, of this service involves an incident detector. And this isn't so much important for the purposes of the new processors, but it kind of helps to explain the role of the range fan in this workflow. So as the range fan or that polygon intersects with the asset, we're able to generate an incident and display that on the web map. That's how we see these red exclamation marks. And as soon as this incident occurs, we're then able to email someone from an operations point of view of the encounter. And lastly, that's where we get the last processor here, the event volume controller. That's where this comes into play. So here we have it throttling messages. So that way the person in the operations or the person receiving the email is only getting one email every X amount of time rather than a continuous amount of emails every time we receive the updated range fan intersecting the mammal.